Yeah, I think I can go ahead. As I told you guys, so any question from the previous day's lecture? You have any general question about the overview of 2D materials and its potential application that we discussed? Yes. How to design 2D materials? I mean, you're saying, now, how did we discover like this 2D different 2D materials? So, I mean, there are some known materials which are two-dimensional, right, which are layered in structure. I mean, they could be binary, they could be ternary, tertiary. For example, MOS2 is a binary compound, moly and sulfide. There are materials like, copper indium phosphide sulfide. It's like 4 elements bonded together, but they still form a layered structure. So these are the materials which are naturally possible, okay? And then when you say how do we design, I don't know what you mean by design. I mean, there are now a lot of this AI-driven tool which is used for materials discovery. Earlier days, chemists used to simply work in the lab. They will be mixing and matching different materials, and they will be creating new ones. Sorry? So when you say design, you mean like what aspect of design? Design could be, making a particular, nanosheet dimension, right? Whether you're making a monolayer versus multi-layer, whether you're kind of making it a nano ribbon versus a nano sheet, that one aspect of design. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Okay, so that's a different aspect of design, right? Where you have a known material and you wanted to change the surface in one way or the other, either by doping or introducing some, like making graphene oxide or introducing nitrogen doping or boron doping, and you're trying to change the surface energy, and that is how you're kind of seeing how a different molecules can be absorbed on the surface, right? That's a different aspect of design. When you say design of 2D material, it will mean that can I discover new 2D materials, right? And that is also possible actually. There are 2000 known 2D materials, but then you can also maybe come up with new ones which we are not aware of, right? Correct. It also depends upon the application. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So then, we'll skip couple of lectures which were related to, how do we make good contacts to 2D material, or how do we make a P-type 2D material, which is more geared towards, how do we get to a CMOS transistor eventually to replace silicon. So we're going to skip those two. We'll probably come back to those lectures towards the end of the course. So, but for the nature of the audience, I'm going to go and skip those two lectures and go to lecture number 4, which is neuromorphic computing or brain-inspired computing, but utilizing 2D materials. So, and I hear a lot of you are actually working on neuromorphic computing. It might be a useful topic for us to discuss. So, before going into brain-inspired computing, right, or artificial intelligence, let us first, embrace the fact that nature has been working intelligently, in order to kind of design just not the human being, but also different species, right? So human evolution is kind of is a testament to what natural intelligence is. And of course, we have evolved. I really like this picture, going from how you were, standing on 2 legs, now I'm almost like sitting and becoming an ape again, because we are not doing a lot of physical activities, simply sitting in front of a computer and doing a lot of things, right? But evolution has kind of taken us to kind of perform different kind of tasks. That is what I call natural intelligence. The first level of task is something that comes naturally. For example, when we see something, we sense something, or when we speak, the development of natural language are kind of we consider very ordinary tasks, right? That when you are born, you automatically kind of have these things known, and that is from your genetic memory, right? You don't really have to learn about the motor action. How of course you learn how to walk, how to talk, right? But this happens more naturally, right? So this is what I call the ordinary task. Then as you grow up, you learn like more skills like mathematics, physics, also gaming. You like to play games, and these are the things that you kind of learn in the course of your lifetime. And eventually, with all this learning, you actually become expert in one of these tasks, right? For example, a doctor will become extremely well in medical diagnostic, right? The same with a financial analyst or scientific analysis, engineering. These are all more specific knowledges that you gather, right? The expert tasks. If you think about the artificial intelligence, it is exactly the other way around, right? In order for you to become an expert, you have to spend a lifetime in order to become really a good doctor or a good engineer. But this is something artificial intelligence can do seamlessly, right? But if you go back to the formal task of mathematics, gaming, this actually took the artificial intelligence quite some time, in order to beat a chess player, let's say for example, right? Or become a very good mathematical solver, right? Because that requires more algorithms. And this is something the artificial neural networks can do very well today. What it could not do even like 3 years back is these ordinary tasks, right? Which is very natural to us, was so difficult for artificial neural networks. And with this large language models, they can actually also do that. And this is where we see that this is the tipping point, that artificial intelligence is now becoming as good or even better than a human being, because artificial intelligence can do all of these things together, which you will require a lot of human beings doing, right? So you see that the evolution of natural intelligence and artificial intelligence has taken two different trajectories altogether, but today they are at a convergence point, okay? And natural intelligence evolves over millions of years, okay? But artificial intelligence have evolved in only last 30 years, and now it is in an exponential trajectory. You can kind of see how artificial intelligence is going to overtake, the natural intelligence very soon if it has not already done so. Okay, but anyway, so that's one aspect. And then we'll talk about the human brain, because we consider the human brain to be the most intelligent, species, right? Because we can do a lot of tasks which other animals cannot do. We have a lot of cognitive power. I mean, the thing is that we are aware of ourselves is an aspect of the human brain which is not really true for a lot of animals. Okay, and generally the artificial neural network has been developed based on the connections in the human brain, the neurons and synapses. We'll talk about that. But we should not forget about the different animal brains either, because these animals can actually do certain tasks much better than what the human beings can do. For example, the octopus has a polarized vision. We humans do not. The spiders can sense micro vibrations. This African bush elephants, these are sub-Saharan elephants, they can sense water from a distance of 50 miles. No quantum sensor today can actually have that level of precision. Okay? Catfish has an amazing sense of taste. The barn owl can hunt in complete darkness. In fact, jewel beetle can sense infrared radiation, and bees can sense Earth's magnetic field. Okay, so animals can do something that even human beings, because we consider ourselves to be the superior being on this planet, right? And we have to be very humble about the fact that animals in some cases are far more superior than human beings. Okay? And generally people thought that, okay, they have some sensory organ which are well tuned for their survival, right? But more recently people have found that it's just not those organs, but also the neural connections in their brain which makes them so much superior. And we are going to look into, dig into a couple of those brains in some of the lectures that we're going to cover in this GAN course. So at the end of the day, if we think about the biological neural network, because we first have to understand that before going into the artificial neural network, how does the information processed? We have the sensory nodes, which are our sensory organs. Like we have 5 sensory organs, which gathers information from the surrounding. It is in form of the light, sound, taste, and all other things that we kind of sense using our sense organ. And then this information is pre-processed by special neurons, which are called the afferent neurons. So each organ, for example, the eyes have rods and cones which converts light information into electrical pulses. The same happens for the ears. There are earbuds which are converting sound information into electrical signal, because inside the brain there is only electrical information. There is no light. Your brain inside is completely blind. It is completely deaf. It has no sense of taste. It has no sense of smell, okay, or even no sense of touch. What it processes information with is just electrical signals. Okay. So what these specific neurons do, they convert whatever outside information is from light to electrical signal, sound to electrical signal, smell to electrical signal, taste to electrical signal, touch to electrical signals, right? And once the signal is transduced, we call this process transduction. You encode that information. How do you encode it? By creating spikes, okay? And these are called electrical spikes or action potentials. And there are different ways of encoding information. It could be in the spike frequency, it could be in the spike timing, it could be in the number of spikes. So that's how brain collects information and transform it, and then it goes into these structures which we known as the neurons or synapses, which does all the computation, okay, based on these electrical signals. And we know that in digital computers, what you do is you kind of take signals from different sources. You do AND operation, OR operations, OR operation. Similar kind of things happen over here, but here it is more in the analog domain. It is not in the digital domain. The brain is mostly analog, and this happens multiple times, because from your sense organ like eyes to your visual cortex, there is not only one neuron. There are layers and layers of neurons. There are like 6 to 7 layers of neurons. This is where the concept of deep neural network comes into the picture, because your brain is actually very deep. It's just not one layer. There are multiple layers of neuron, and one neuron propagates the information to the next to the next one, and that's how it eventually reaches the visual cortex, right? And that is where the decision is made. Okay. For example, when you're playing football, you're actually seeing the ball, and that information is fed back into your visual cortex, and then you're deciding whether to hit it in what direction, right? And this process also happens multiple times, and this is where you do this process of learning or memory formation, okay? Because who you are is your memory, okay? Because if you forget about what the things you have learned, right, then your existence is really not there, right? So literally, during this computation process, right, this was the difference between an ordinary computer and the human brain. Because in an ordinary computer, or a calculator, let's say for example, if you input information, it will give you an output, but it will forget about what it did, right? That's how the computers work. You give it a task, it will do it, and then it will forget it forever. But we never forget the task that we do. And the task that we repeat, we remember it. That is what we call practice, right? If you read something only once, you will probably forget it, but if you keep reading it multiple times, then you are kind of reinforcing your learning process. So that is how the brain actually works, right? And you see how fascinating it is, right? So many layers of information processing, encoding, decoding, and eventually, getting into decision making and learning. Okay, this part is clear, right? Any question on this? Okay, let's now go into the structure in the brain, which actually leads to all this computation, and probably you have drawn it for your secondary examination and higher secondary examination. This is called a neuron, right? The neuron has got different components. So the first part over here is the cell body, which is the soma. This is exactly where the computation takes place, and once the computation takes place here, it generates a spike, and the spike actually goes through this axon, which is literally the transmission line, the communication channel, and it reaches this end of this neuron, which is called the the terminal or the synapses, because this is where this neuron communicates with another neuron, the next neuron. Okay, and you can see at this end of one neuron and the beginning of the other neuron is called the dendrite. Okay, the dendrite and the axon terminals actually meet at a location. Physically, they are very close to each other. The gap you see between the two terminal can be of the order of tens of nanometers. Okay, I mean this is even closer than the smallest transistor that you make today, right? And this is just the course of evolution that this has happened. Okay. How, we do not know, okay. But this is what it is. So now what happens is, so whenever information comes to that this terminal is also quite fascinating. Okay, in this neuronal terminal, there are these vesicles. These vesicles contains neurotransmitters. We all talk about dopamine, serotonin, what really gives us our, all the emotions. This is all kind of captured in these very small molecules which are within these vesicles. Okay. Once an action potential comes in, these vesicles actually merge with the cell membrane and they release these neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft, which is the gap between the two synapses. And then these molecules go and bind to the receptor molecules on the other neuron. And that is how the information gets transduced from one neuron to the other through the release of the neurotransmitter, right? And this eventually controls your mood, your depression, your happiness, enjoyment is all about these neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters could be of two types. Excitatory, which is going to tell the next neuron that fire. I am firing, you also fire. Okay, so you also generate a signal. Or it could be inhibitory, which means that it is telling that I am firing, but you please do not fire. These are called inhibitory neurotransmitters, right? So there are different types of neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, right? Each of them perform this functionality. Okay? This is important because this is how the information is transmitting from one neuron to the other. As I told you, it has excitation and inhibition. And here you see generally when we do computation in a computer, it is generally temporal. You have one information now, another information next, and they are kind of computed. It has no spatial nature. But in the brain, the information is processed both spatially from which neuron it is coming as well as when it is coming. Right? So both informations are actually integrated in an analog manner. It is not digital. Okay? And there's a massive parallelism. A lot of neurons are working parallelly, okay, in order to process that information from your sensory organ to the visual cortex. And it is also based on the present input and your past experience. That is something that your computers do not. If you know calculator, the calculator doesn't care. If you add 3 plus 3, it will be 6. It will not be 7 based on whether you have another calculation of 6 done just previously, right? It has no memory. But in the brain, it actually depends upon the past information as well, right? So your 2 plus 2 can become 5 if the previous information was 1. Okay. So memory and logic are kind of intertwined in our brain. Okay. That's another aspect. And then finally, it does a digital decision making, whether to fire or not to fire, right? So many aspects of neuronal computation. The other important thing is the number of neurons in an adult human brain. You can see the number over here, 100 billion, right? And we just spoke about what is the number of transistors in your cell phone, right? How many is that? 10 billion. So your brain have 10 times more number of neurons than even the most advanced chip that you're using in your cell phone, right? And each neuron on average is connected to 1,000 other neurons, right? It is almost like one neuron has like 1,000 friends. It can talk to 1,000 other people. Because these are the synapses where the information is stored. That's where the memory is. And there are total 100 trillion synapses. And the numbers are simply beyond even human imagination. This is all in our brain, but beyond our imagination, right? And that gives the brain such a humongous amount of computational power. Okay? Today, the artificial neural networks can do it. Why? Because we also have equal amount of computing power and storage. So we are now able to match this, right? And as I told you, the computing primitives can be digital, analog, as well as probabilistic. We'll go into probabilistic computing as well. So all types of computation are happening in the brain. Okay. Now, artificial neural network, therefore, is kind of deriving inspiration from the brain, and it does the same thing. Let's say, for example, you want to classify, these images. These are like just alphabets, right? First, you do some pre-processing, then actually you create this network, which we call the artificial neural network. And here, these circles are your neurons. So we are representing your neuron by the circle, and the lines that connect the circles are your synapses, right? This is literally an abstract level kind of a mimicry of the neural network in your brain, right? So that becomes your artificial neural network. And then what happens is that at each node, you take the input x1, x2, x3, you multiply it by some weight, and then you sum them. And after making the sum, you do some mathematical operation called activation, which eventually leads to the output that goes into the next neuron. Okay? And there has been a lot of development in artificial neural network. There are these, Spinnaker was one of the first demonstration of an a chip which is from IBM. No, Spinnaker is from actually a European company. True North is the first neuromorphic chip which was demonstrated by IBM, which kind of mimicked 256 programmable neurons. That was already a lot. Still quite far, right? 256 programmable neuron and having 268 programmable synapses, million. But we are talking about trillion when it comes to the brain, right? This was the first neuromorphic chip. And then I think this was scaled up with some brain scale, again an European Union project, where they could actually mimic up to 49 million synapses, right? So initial days, the artificial neural networks were small, and that's why they could do only so many things. Today it's just massive. The ChatGPT and the large language model uses number of synapses which are at least 10 times higher than the human brain. Okay? So you can see this has been happening, and I keep talking about the exponential growth, right? So back in 2000, if you think about the capability of our computer, that will literally match only the computing power of a fruit fly, okay? Because it has only that many number of neurons in the brain. And then it was projected by 2020, we will reach the computing power of human brain, which we actually did, right? And now you can see it was predicted by 2040 we will reach all human brains combined, but unfortunately or unfortunately, this trajectory has going up now like this. So today in ChatGPT, we literally have the expertise of all human beings, and literally not only all human beings that are living today, but also in the past combined. Okay? So this is what is happening. So it is a super exponential trend that has happened with the neuromorphic computing. So now you may ask me the question, so why are we doing neuromorphic computing if everything is done? Right? Then we are doomed, right? All the companies, NVIDIA, chips are already there. DeepSeek, ChatGPT, OpenAI, lots of companies, right? So where is the problem? Where is the problem that we are aspiring to solve, right? Anybody has an idea where the problem is, right? This is what giving us all these things. ImageNet was the first big neuromorphic computing net platform. AlphaGo, that is, Go is a game which is one of the toughest game. It comes from the Chinese culture. Right? So I think back in 2018 or 2019, they developed this AlphaGo, which can beat the best player in Go, in the game of Go. Okay? Then ChatGPT AlphaFold, it can predict protein structure, and we got the Nobel Prize just last year for AlphaFold in chemistry, right? As well as artificial neural network got the Nobel Prize in physics. Right? So therefore, you can see this is all good. So where is the bad thing? Why are we sitting here in this room and talking about 2D materials, neuromorphic computing, brain-inspired computing? Where is the gap? Well, you can integrate sensors, right? If you think about Alexa, what is it doing? It is literally conversing with you. It is kind of giving you the information about humidity, whether you should take a coffee or not a coffee. So it's also kind of sensing. You just have to integrate it. Emotional aspect, yes. Emotional aspect, yes, you're right that these things are still not emotional, but I'm not very sure how long it will be before they're also emotionally intelligent. And we have a lecture dedicated. We're also making devices which are emotionally intelligent, where we'll come back to that. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And we can have a discussion in this room or maybe even outside this course actually about whether that remains any longer true. Because if you think about human innovation, right? You're talking about, whether the chat GPT can invent something new or discover something new, and that is something we human beings are very proud about. But if you think about our discoveries, this is also driven by our memory of what we have learned. We might be thinking a little bit outside the box, but we are generally confined within the periphery of our own memory and our own knowledge. You will not be able to invent something in chemistry. You might be able to invent something in physics because you're by training a physicist. I'm an engineer. I might be able to invent something along that space. If you ask me to invent something going into biology, I will not be. So if you think about it, human innovation is driven by, at the end of the day, their memory or their knowledge. Knowledge is nothing but the memory that you have stored in your brain, right? So if I kind of give the chat GPT the information about chemistry, biology, physics, all the governing rules, it can also invent, and I can tell you that because I was just a conference I attended in South Korea last week. It was on materials for AI and AI for materials, where there are labs which have now automated instruments which plan experiment, go and do the experiment, test the hypothesis, revise it, and keep doing that until they discover a new material. Okay? So we can have this discussion about, a greater discussion, but that's not the problem. What I'm saying is that's not the problem about, that the artificial intelligence today with the large language model can actually also innovate. Okay? Yes. So we used to have more neurons in our brain than what all these cloud servers have nowadays in terms of the number of transistors. And as you say, experience is nothing but memory, right? Because when you experience something, you're registering it in your brain. That's what we call experience. If you forget something, that is not an experience. For example, if I ask you, what did you eat 1 year earlier today on the same day for lunch, you won't be able to tell, right? But if I tell you that 1 year past today was your birthday, right? You might be able to think that, oh, it was my birthday, so my mother must have cooked some pies for me, so I must have had that pies, right? So you can see that so when we have experience or associative experience, we remember things, and that is what becomes as our memory or our knowledge, right? And it's the fact that we, our human brain cannot store all the information. We lost a lot of information, and that kind of makes it not an expert in some instances, and we cannot innovate. What I'm saying is that a chat GPT never forgets. You see, it remembers smallest, tiniest things, and it can correlate, right? So that is also not the problem, right? What I'm saying is that scaling things up and doing arbitrary thinking is also possible with today's artificial neural network. The problem is somewhere else. The problem is whether it is sustainable or not, and that's the bigger question. So I'm going to show you a curve over here, and it shows you the carbon dioxide emitted, trying to train these models. Okay, you can see training an AI model takes this much amount of carbon dioxide emission, and compare that to a round trip between New York to San Francisco. That's a 6 to 7 hours flying. Okay, look at the amount of energy emitted. I mean, the carbon dioxide emitted for a round trip. Even from India to US, if I fly, that's going to be 300 times less than just training these AI models or inferring. Okay, you can see the amount of energy that an average human spends in their entire life. We are talking about these models being as good as the human beings, right? But look at where they stand in terms of the energy that they consume, right? And energy, as of today, is not unlimited, correct? So therefore, you can make it as good as you want, but if this shoots up, and that's what is happening, then we are in a big trouble. Now, how can we make it sustainable? Because today, the entire cloud that is running takes the amount of energy that an entire city will take for a month, right? So if we do not check it, then you will not have light, fans, anything going on in your homes, but you can probably just do ChatGPT, right? So whether it is sustainable is a big challenge. So these are extremely power hungry, right? Oh, this one? Human life, yeah. So average one is in 1 year time span, in 1 year time span. This is the amount of energy that a human being will spend, human life, yeah. No, this is the entire lifetime. I think, yeah, you're right. I don't know whatever this average 1 year means. Why did they put average 1 year? It's like the entire human lifespan, the entire human lifespan. Hmm. That's a good question. So generally training these AI models can take from several weeks to even few months. Okay. So that's like the training, but there is also a cost of inferring. So let's say, for example, every time you're typing something in Google, you're spending some energy, right? And even that energy is going to be very high compared to a round trip from US to San Francisco. It keeps on adding up because everyone is using Google, everyone is using ChatGPT, everyone is using large models, right? Correct. Many times you have to retrain. Many times you have to retrain. Uh, Once it is trained, right, it's stored in cloud. It's stored in cloud, yes. These are the clouds, right? So these are all the data centers, right? Data center is what? Storing information. That's what it is. This is like essentially putting, 100 billion or even more than human beings put together, right? That is data center, right? Memory. So literally putting all the memory and all the knowledge that we have gathered in the course of humanity is here. The size of the data center is like this. Yes, exactly. And each of these racks that you're seeing, they have all these chips. Now you think about that cell phone that you're having. It has a chip like this size. This kind of a chip is full in all these racks. So this is almost like a football field. It's a volume, right? Football field. It's a volume, yeah. And the power it consumes is 10 megawatt. Okay. Now let's compare it with the human brain. Okay, just a light bulb, and we know the size of the human brain. Yes. So this is where the problem is, right? So we can, light the, whatever AI is giving it to us today, but it's probably creating a lot of damage to the future generations because we are consuming a lot of valuable resources on this planet, right? Now you can always make the argument that, maybe 5 years down the line we'll have nuclear power plants and that will solve all the energy problems of the world, nuclear fission, nuclear fusion. In fact, a lot of companies like NVIDIA and Google, they're actually thinking about, all these nuclear reactors because then you can actually have clean energy, driving these AI systems. Possible. But how safe, I mean, correct, yeah. I mean, fusion is very difficult, right? But there are some recent development which are looking very promising for nuclear fusion. Nuclear fission is there, but then, there are consequences. I mean, it comes to the geopolitics at that place, right? That either you can generate more energy and sustain the AI, right? Or you start thinking about making the AI less energy consuming, right? And this is the approach that we are taking. And this is where we are deriving the inspiration from nature, right? Because even animals, if you think about, their brains are even tinier, and yet they can also perform extremely difficult computational tasks, right? With very limited resources. Think about a fruit fly. How much does it eat? Hardly any CO2 footprint is there, right? So why can't we go back to nature and derive inspiration from those and then start redesigning our neuromorphic computing paradigm? Right? And this is the approach that I am going to talk about in the course of the next couple of days. Yes. Good question. So I think next lecture is about memory. It's a very good question. So brain is extremely adaptable and flexible. Okay. So there are two things. So when you talk about volatile memory, for the sake of the other people, volatile means something that you immediately forget, okay, or a memory that is not retentive. You cannot retain that information. And non-volatile simply means that you will be able to retain that information for a long time, right? Now, this term, long term is kind of an arbitrary concept, right? Long term could be 1 day, it could be 10 days, it could be 1 year, it could be 10 years, it could be for eternity, right? So what the brain has is a mechanism of storing information for short term, that we call the short term memory. It has long term memory. It has multiple different facets of memory based on what is needed. For example, for your day to day, and you also have a genetic memory, okay, which is kind of forever, right? For example, once you learn walking, you will never forget about it, right? But if you learn, let's say for example, you this neuromorphic course today, I mean few days afterwards, you may forget, right? So it's very flexible in terms of both being volatile and non-volatile. The information which is not required, the brain will forget, right? Because it has only limited storage, right? Even with 100 trillion synapses, it's only 100 trillion. It is not like 10,000 trillion, right? For example, today in your phone, you can store all the images, but after some time, you have to delete some, right? You have to free up some space to put new images. The same applies to the brain, and brain does it more organically without you telling. Exactly. You can do that. That's why you become expert, right? By making many neurons, remember certain things, right? And then your neural network is so good that you are a very good doctor, right? But then you cannot become a very good historian because you have kind of exhausted your memory space to become a good doctor. Makes sense, right? So that's kind of is the idea. And then and the people who do not have long-term memory in any area, they are not experts. They become ordinary. You only become extraordinary by making sure that your brain is at least remembering one aspect, right? If you start to remember everything, it's almost that saying that jack of all trades, master of none. Okay, so that literally is your brain. ChatGPT is different. It could be jack of all trades and master of all, because it is not limited by 100 trillion synapses, right? It is just limited by how many devices we can make and put together to make this cloud service. Make sense? Okay. So this is where we are coming from, and one of the main reasons that all these ChatGPT models are very energy consuming is the fact that most of the computers are built with this von Neumann computing principle, which means that your logic unit, where all this arithmetic calculation happens in addition, multiplication, whatever algorithm you are running, is separate from where you store the information. Okay, physically separate. They are not right next to each other. So every time you want to do some computation, you have to bring the information from memory to the logic, do the computation, and then again put it back into the memory. So every time you are shuttling the data between these two, and that consumes energy, not the computation itself or not the storage itself. It is the shuttling of data between the compute and logic that takes up a lot of energy. And since we are now dealing with so much of data, there's so much of data shuttling, you're kind of losing a lot of energy over there. But how does the brain does it? In the brain, as I told you, the logic unit is the neuron, which does computation, and the memory is the synapse, right, which is the connection between the neurons, and they are right next to each other, right? So there is no shuttling of data between logic and memory. They're really intertwined, correct? And that makes the brain so much more energy efficient. It is not shuttling the data back and forth, right? And this is a principle that the artificial neural network has not embraced, right? Whenever we talk about all these big networks, every time they're loading, unloading, loading, unloading, and that consumes a lot of energy, right? So this is the principle that we have to somehow adopt, and this can be done by following this kind of principles. Okay, this is all the things that we're going to cover in this course. One is in-memory compute. You're doing the compute in the memory itself, so that there is no reason for you to shuttle the data. in sensor compute. Like you were talking about, the sensors are separate. Yeah, it is very true. You're also getting a lot of data from sensors. They're coming, then you are communicating with the sensor, right? So can we do in sensor compute, right? Can we integrate logic with the sensors? Then neurons and synapses, of course, we have to mimic. Then we have to also think about neuromimetic circuits, because we are only dealing with AND gate, OR gate, current mirror, the human level of knowledge. But brain circuits are very unique because they are unique for different tasks. So can we design circuits which are more neuromimetic, not based on our AND or logic gates, right? That is another aspect. Then the information that is processed in our computers are kind of in a level where there's a constant voltage or a constant current. It is not spike based, but the brain is actually spike based. And the spike means that you are consuming even lesser amount of energy, right? Because it just lives for a very short amount of time, right? So spike based computing also makes it a very energy efficient. We also have to embrace how can we convert information to spike trains and then do the computation, right? And finally, I will also talk about probabilistic computing, because sometimes your computer is kind of lost into precision. It wants to give you a highly accurate answer. If you ask the computer to multiply two big numbers, it will give an accurate number, right, after the multiplication. It's very accurate, but for that accuracy, it actually requires a lot more energy. But some of the challenges in nature does not require a very precise computation. For example, if you want to schedule the flights, right? Flight schedule is a problem, right? I mean, there are so many flights which has to go from one place to the other, and you don't really need the best solution. You need a solution that works, right? And that is good enough. So you don't really always need a highly precise solution. A solution that works is often very good in nature for survival, right? And that is something we will deal into this probabilistic computing, or approximate computing. That saves a huge amount of energy for the brain. Okay? We'll talk about that as well, right? So this is what we are going to do. I'm going to show you a quick video of our philosophy of the lab. Hopefully this video actually plays. Let's see. Last time it didn't. It's well known that animals can actually, it's going to be problem with the player. Okay, so we'll skip the video. Maybe in the lab time I will show. Yeah. Okay, so this is where I will end lecture 4. Okay, and I will take any questions, because in the next lecture, first I'm going to talk about memory devices, because we spoke about the importance of memory for neuromorphic computing. So we'll talk about what are the different ways of storing information in a device, and then we'll talk about one by one different sensing. Let's say, for example, photosensing and how we can do neuromorphic photosensing, and then we'll go into one by one different animal brains and talk about this neuromimetic circuits and how to perform brain-inspired computation. Okay, so let me stop here for this lecture. Let me take questions on this general kind of a topic. Yes.
What is the difference between the neurons and transistors?
Right. So transistors, as you can see, they have a different governing principle, right? So it's a 3-terminal device. You apply a bias, you get some current, right? Neurons work a little bit differently. So neurons get information from dendrite, right? So different information come from each dendrite, then it sums them. Okay, it makes an addition, and then it kind of does something called a thresholding operation. Okay, a single transistor cannot do what a neuron can do. Okay, so you will probably require, if you really need to map the functioning of a neuron, you may need at least 80 to 100 transistors, right? Because transistors are not designed to mimic brain. They are actually designed to do computational work like multiplication, addition, redundant work, and then you can write an algorithm. But at the end of the day, it is all about addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, matrix multiplication, right? But the brain is not designed to do those things, right? That's why the brain, how it has evolved, a single neuron works in a very complex manner. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. And if you want to really mimic a neuron, a single neuron, 100 is even less. If you really want to, control every aspect of neuron, okay, like the dendrites, the axon, the soma, the opening of the ion channel, release of the neurotransmitters, right? It's like a chemistry, a fascinating world of chemistry that is going on, and you're trying to now kind of mimic it using, very simple physical devices like a transistor. You see, so they're fundamentally different, and this is where the problem is, because we are trying to use those transistors now to mimic the brain, and therefore, in order to capture even a single neuron, I need 100 transistors. Each transistor consume energy, and now I am trying to mimic 100 billion neurons, which is so many transistors, and you can see how it's kind of a avalanche of energy consumption that starts happening once I start to mimic the brain the way it actually works, right? You see, so we have to come up with new devices. This is what the point is, which are more kind of functioning as a similar way like the neuron, right? It cannot be just a transistor, right? So you have to start designing new devices, and this is where the 2D materials will become really very helpful, because they're like multifunctional. You can start going back to the drawing board literally, right? And trying to see, because now we know more about the neurons. If you ask me, when the transistor was discovered, it was like 1925, and when the first transistor came in, 1947, right? That time, people hardly knew about the structure of the neurons, right? But now we have tools today to go and really probe even a single ion channel in a neuron. Those tools never existed. The tools are very important. You see, scientific discovery, this is like, a positive feedback loop. Today we can even look into, under transmission electron microscope these neurons, which we could not, right? Because electron beams is extremely high energy, so it should have damaged tissues and stuff. But today we can do that with cryo-TEM. So we now have the information which we did not have earlier. That's why we never kind of thought of designing a transistor which will be mimicking the brain. Make sense? Because it has followed a different historical evolution path. Right? Yes.
How easier is it, you talk about do it ourselves in terms of design the synapses and different parts of the neuron. Compared to that, how easier is it to actually control the flow of neurotransmitters? Because a few years back, in 2019 or 20, there was research on Neuralink that they were trying to.
That's still going on. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's still developing. So
yeah.
What's the state of that? I mean, is it? Are they just made it make on as we go?
No, I think Neuralink is an extremely difficult project. So as you know, Bill Clinton took the initiative of mapping up the human DNA, right? And it was a 10-year project. The project even got finished within 8 years, right? Barack Obama actually took the initiative of brain mapping, right? Although it was initially thought 10 years we'll be able to map the brain, but it's so complex it has not yet been finished. Okay, it's so much more difficult because the 3-dimensional space, DNA is still like a strand. You can actually kind of go and map the entire human genome. But it's far more difficult to first understand the brain. So Neuralink is a different concept where you're actually even putting chips inside the brain and trying to communicate between different human brains. Whether you want to do it or not, it's a different thing. That's the Elon Musk project of the Neuralink. Okay, we'll see. It's far more difficult because we have so much less understanding about the brain. We have way more understanding about the human genome, and the genomes are very similar among the species and stuff. And we know how the genome leads to protein folding and things like that, right? But so much little is known about the brain because probing the brain is extremely difficult. Okay, and that's why that project will take a way longer time. Okay. But in principle, it is possible. In principle, it is possible to have chips, which is the human-machine interface. We are already doing human-machine interface with robots and stuff, but that is at the external level, not inside the body. But if you can think about putting things inside the body, you can actually start monitoring your body and telling the brain, because when diseases come, we only recognize this disease when it is at a more aggravated stage. Right? But if you have sensors, in your heart, in your blood, everywhere, it can already detect it at a very early stage, tell the brain to work accordingly and get it fixed. Right? So, Kumbh may not be required. We may get to immortality even without the Kumbh. Science can give it. And today we have the tools. Okay? With CRISPR technology, with artificial intelligence, okay, we might be nearing Kumbh. Yes, that's what the Neuralink project is. There are some work that is going on. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Correct. 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 Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So there is an MIT startup. Yeah, absolutely, and this is happening already. So the only difficulty of putting things inside the brain is there's a lot of FDA approval you have to go through in order to start putting things in your brain, because this could be. Yes. So what is happening is an MIT startup. So the MIT startup is there where you can actually think something, okay, and there are like not inside the brain right now. What I'm saying is it is still not inside the brain. It is still like the probes. It can actually read what you're thinking, and it can even, like, for example, go to Walmart and get that thing for you and come back. That is different than what I'm saying. That it can do the thinking part. Now, giving vision is a very complex pathway. In order to give vision to a blind person, okay, that's kind of what you're getting at, right? Yeah, it's. I mean, you can today, because with more understanding of the visual pathway, you need to know. I'm pretty sure it's going on. We are not doing it, but I'm pretty sure it is going on. Okay, I mean, implants are there. Implants are there. Yeah. Yeah. It's more tough. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There was a project 10 years ago. A person, drawing both eyes. They made an implant, sort of an implant. Basically, it came out of his head. They connected the little wires, sort of. The connectors to the interface between the optic nerve and where the brain connects the optic nerve to. And then they had a photo sensor out of his, coming out of his head and outside. So he could detect
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
then he could sense it. So basically, that eye was out of his eye. I actually watched the whole video, of the project. It was approximately 9 or 10 years ago. It's kind of old. It's very old project. And that guy is still alive, and he's still trying. He can see, but not exactly the way that.
Correct. Yeah. 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 Good. Any other questions? Yes.
If you talk about decision making, humans can make decisions according to the situation. But if you talk about AI, they have to make decisions on their memory, on the basis of their memory.
Right.
So if you have to make a new decision on the basis of condition, how the AI will work on that?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, so when you talk about decision, right, I mean, you're bringing in this emotional aspect of human being. Because, I mean, for example, if I give you a chocolate in front of you, whether you will eat it or not eat it, also not only depends upon whether you have blood sugar level high, also depends upon your mood to some extent, right? So human decision making is way more entangled because of the fact that it is not a logical decision always. because we have a logical part of the brain and we have an emotional part of the brain, and they kind of walk kind of hand in hand. And emotional part of the brain, the AI is, I mean, that also makes the AI more reliable, right? Of course, in front of the camera, right? I mean, otherwise you would have been predicting the behavior of your girlfriend. You cannot do it, right? Because it is not always logical, right? Whenever human beings behave, the behavior is not always logical. It is also influenced by her emotion. If you have an AI girlfriend or an AI boyfriend, right? Every time, whatever you wish for, right? So what I'm saying is that this emotional aspect is important in our decision making. I agree, and that makes us probably human, right? And AI today cannot do it. Whether we want the AI to do it or not, that's a big and different debate.
Another thing is also there, right? If we put the same emotional situation for all of us in the situation, different individuals will have different decisions.
Exactly.
So these are all different decisions. But AI, once you generate AI, it will take time.
Yeah.
So each individual is unique.
Exactly. AIs are not different, right? But you can bring that variability, right? For example, when an AI, when this DeepSeek, you ask a question about, a political question, okay, based on whether you're asking it in China versus in the US versus in India, it will give you a different answer because they know that whom am I talking to. Make sense?
I think you have to think.
We are in a very different area. I mean, a lot of people, public are not aware of it. Okay, I mean, and this is where actually a lot of awareness is required. Okay, so we can probably stop the camera, take a 10-minute break, and then we can again restart with the next lecture.